Let me ask 2 or 3 questions to try to poke some holes in your thesis, and then we'll open it up to the group. First, just on the economics of the shale gas part of it. You sort of dismiss the notion that the lower prices themselves would deter enough investment to change the basic story. What about the anxieties over groundwater pollution, that the fracking technology will have such adverse effects on the environment, particularly on water supply, that that could throw a big chink into the likely production profile that you talk about?
I think there are two parts there. First part is on natural gas. We've seen Gasland. We've seen the New York Times stories about the pollution of water by natural gas. And there are now studies. If you spend any time in the oil, watching oil and gas, you watch people putting pipes down, and they, they're 40 or 50-foot sections, and they stop momentarily to screw them together, and they cement them and they push them down and they keep them going. And the thought was, okay, they didn't do it quite right, and there were bad cement jobs, so some gas was leaking out as it went through the water aquifer, and that's this is why the Pennsylvanians and so on are going slowly on that. And that turns out to be the explanation. Gas isn't migrating up through the 8,000 feet. It's bad practice, and that process now they'll fix. I think that'll get pretty well fixed. The other thing is the water. The way you frack oil is you drive water down and you push it through and explosive, and that's an issue that I think will get addressed as towns raise the price of water and make the industry practice more care. As long as oil stays at $120 in the world level, if the industry is forced to, the industry will find ways. There are some patents and processes that are being developed at universities that essentially clean the water out already. I mean, the reward for finding the solution to that is just too big. It will not stop this for very long.
Okay, let me go to a second question. You asserted quite strong, you cited back at the start of your remarks our colleague John Williamson expressing doubts about the competitiveness thesis on the grounds that the arbitrage always tends to equate prices across markets, law of one price, even if you don't believe in it in absolute terms. But you've posited that there will be a very long period during which this much lower U.S. energy price will persist. And you even suggested that gap will increase. Elaborate a bit. Why is it that the traditional arbitrage of economics will not take place here? What are the big impediments, the infrastructure, the investment requirements that would have to take place to create a world market in these products and thereby erode, if not eliminate, that big price differential? As you know, that just strikes trade economists, it's like a dagger in their hearts. How can this be? So, but I know you and others in the business strongly believe it. But elaborate, tell us why it is that in this particular market, the impediments, to market equilibration just won't operate, and refine that as much as you can with a time dimension.
Well, okay, let me start with a real simple example. Every 4 years, new people move to Washington, D.C., and they move here and they say, oh, we had a much nicer house. Mostly they say we had a really fancy house where we were, and we can't buy anything here.
They used to say that.
And well, yeah, it's true. But I mean, it's still, if they were moving from Texas up here or something, they'd say that. If they're moving from Los Angeles, it was different. But it's, I mean, and obviously, they understood that you can't move the house from Texas to here, and you can't move the piece of land. For natural gas, it's quite similar to that house. The process of transporting natural gas from the United States, say to Japan, would involve liquefaction, and the liquefaction plants cost on the order of, I think, $3 to $5 billion. They are very expensive. They take years to build. You have to get a permit to build one. LNG is a dangerous cargo. If you've always had these specters of people blowing up an LNG tanker. That's not really the case, I don't think. But it's a dangerous issue. So you have to go through the permitting process, and you have to find, since you're spending all this money, you have to get buyers willing to pay for years. The Japanese are signing 20-year contracts now with the Australians at high prices for LNG because you want to amortize the cost of the project. So Chevron has a couple of projects, and you look and you say, okay, they're selling this natural gas at an oil-based price, and isn't this dangerous for the Japanese to proceed? And yes, it is dangerous for the Japanese to proceed, but Chevron sold 60% out of one train, and I think 40% out of another train, because the Japanese need the gas. So this is an important issue for them. And they'll sign the contracts. It's just going to take a long time to figure out where to put the plants and build the plants and permit them. And then the other thing is you have to convince the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission to approve it. There are many consumers of natural gas, chemical companies and so on, that are going to push the U.S. to go slow on permitting natural gas exports to preserve this competitive advantage, just as other countries have done the same thing with their natural resources.
Let me ask you to speculate a little bit on that, because that issue does come up. Will the U.S. go protectionist on the export side, try to retain the advantage that you say by blocking exports of the lower priced gas? We've been taking China to the WTO for doing a similar thing. We've been opposing it when other people do it. Do you really think the U.S. would or should try to retain this advantage that you're extolling the virtues of through resorting to export protectionism?
I have mixed views. You look at some of the steps that some countries have taken, Chinese, for instance, on solar panels, and you say, well, we now have an advantage. Maybe we should not rush to export everything. But on the other hand, basically, I'm a free trader, and you want to see it pursued. At the same time, you want to see it pursued in a way which doesn't leave the U.S. exporting gas for less at a lower price. Now, the one thing is, it's never going to be as cheap in Japan as it is here. It is expensive to move liquefied natural gas. So we will have, I'm not sure whether it's $3 or $5 advantage because of the cost of shipping the gas. But logically, we should move ahead. But I think the Canadians will move ahead much more quickly because they have more surplus gas. They've permitted the pipeline to Kitimat, and whereas they're having trouble permitting the oil pipeline to Kitimat, so I think they'll be selling substantial amounts of natural gas to China.
Yeah, and I guess that's the other question. Will other producers, you've mentioned Australia, now Canada, we know Qatar, Saudi Arabia, others in the Gulf, you mentioned Russia. There are other huge, there are countries with huge reserves of natural gas. Won't they be drawn into this market in a way that will drive down that price in the rest of the world?
Well, it's a question of the rate of growth of demand and supply. I mean, the Russians are working very hard to keep the prices up. They need the high gas. Needs the high gas price. Algeria needs the high gas price, and most of those exporting countries have met together more than once. Now they don't call it a cartel yet, but they are working to try to sustain higher prices. Whether they succeed or not, history says they won't. But OPEC's managed to, since really 1999, when prices were $10 a barrel, OPEC's managed to keep prices up pretty much through thick and thin.
So what's the prospect for a GOPEC, and would the U.S. join?
I think that the long run, the gas OPEC is not going to work as well, and the U.S. isn't a big enough player on the gas side.
Okay, that'll probably provoke some questions. Let me ask one more, then we'll open it up. You have taken what I regard as a big leap. assuming everything you say is right on the prices, you've then leapt to the conclusion that this will be a sea change in overall national competitiveness of the United States. But you didn't really give us any quantitative links. And maybe that's going to be the guts of the book you're planning to write. But tell us as much as you can, how do you get from even this huge price differential in energy, how do you get from that to the U.S. eliminating its overall trade and current account deficits, having a stronger dollar, having a faster growing economy, which you were even kind of positing might even be on the Asian scale. How significant is all this for the macro economy, and is it justified to go to such sweeping conclusions about the overall economic outlook?
Well, I'm going to ask you a question, but I'll say I learned that from you as my teacher, that you need to make the strong statements even if you're wrong to call.
No, but the other lesson I taught you, Phil, the other lesson, you have to make at least some, if flimsy, justification.
Well, and
but you didn't really give us even a flimsy justification.
I have more. I think I did. I think I gave you more than that. But I did not say on the current account because I think I remember the lessons right. Yeah, the trade deficit depends on the savings investment and balance. So one of the questions I'm not going to. I mean, leave that aside. Goods we may export. One, I think 0.5%, maybe 1% more per year. Starting slower, building up.
Of economic growth.
Economic growth. Because it's a substantial investment in things like ethylene crackers, steel mills, because of steel capacity, upgrading steel mills and so on. We're seeing already talks about it through Virginia and so on, because of the very low cost of natural gas. Second, in Western Europe, there have been a number of discussions about how the German companies bring down their costs by trucking trucking parts, doing the high labor intensity work in Poland and other low labor costs. We rely on trucks. Everybody relies heavily on trucks. Our trucking costs, a fuel cost for trucking, will be half to a quarter the trucking costs for those countries, and that's going to make the logistical expenses of operation are going to be substantially lower, so that you're going to see more and more manufacturing come here. I think, as I look at this, the question in my mind is, when are we going to read that Burlington Northern and perhaps a Union Pacific are choosing to go electrify? Out west we drive a lot, long distances and so on. You see these long stretches of railroad. You go to Europe, all of those are electrified. With the low natural gas costs and environmental pressures in California and so on, and I left the West out of this, it just makes sense to move to an electrified railway system, which again brings our costs down, costs of operation down over time. So I think logistical costs will be lower. The other element in this is just again, it's blundering into this, but U.S. labor cost negotiations following the 2008-2009 recession have dropped dramatically. We saw this in Caterpillar's closing its Ontario plant and moving its manufacturing of locomotives down to the United States. You're seeing this in other companies. I think you'll see a number of Japanese companies facing these very high electricity costs in Japan, uncertainty in Japan, moving more manufacturing to the United States. So, I mean, if you start looking at this and you say, okay, while the United States' real future is in services, suddenly there's a lot of manufacturing to be brought back here, and you go through the input-output tables, and it's significant. You can add a 1% growth of that per year. The other part of this thing is we're already seeing auto industry sales are going way up. One of the reasons auto sales are going up is gasoline prices are high. Well, the move to E85 and so on will accelerate sales of new cars that operate on this lower fuel, lower price fuels. It's just, you just work through it. The agriculture side, it's just lower prices of energy, lower prices of natural gas are going to make fertilizer less expensive, much less expensive. So you'll have, the farmer, the environmentalists, there's some huge environmental and global warming issues in this thing, but the I can get there several ways when I start adding it up now. Whether it's 1%, 0.5% a year, it's positive. And energy has been a negative for so much of my career that it's
big change.
Yeah.
Okay, floor is open for questions. Bill Klein. Go ahead, take the mic over to him. There's a standing mic in the back, and we got a traveling mic. Stand up, give your name and location, and fire away.
I'm Bill Klein from the Institute. Phil, if you take the Energy Information Agency's projections of total exports and total imports of energy and you translate them to barrels of oil, still by 2017, which is going to be the sort of new medium term, for example, the next WEO of the IMF, you get a trade deficit in energy of 2% of GDP. So despite all of the seeming sea change, you sort of have business as usual in terms of the U.S. being a trade deficit country over that horizon. Now, do you think, A, that that's the right perspective on the trade balance, or B, do you think that the Energy Information Agency's projections are way off base, or C, do you think that I've made a mistake when I applied my methodology?
No, Bill, I know you didn't make a mistake. And when I saw Howard Grinspecht, it was...
I didn't make a mistake.
Yeah, I know. Howard said, I finally said something nice about EIA. And EIA, I've been highly critical of EIA. I was there when it was founded at the Council of Economic Advisors. I have trouble with their data, and particularly on consumption, because they don't measure gasoline consumption. They don't measure product consumption. And so he said, you finally said something nice, because they issued this report on the Iran sanctions, and it was a really detailed, it was one of the best reports that I think the agency's put out. This is implementing whether we can implement sanctions on the 28th. EIA is mandated by law to produce these long-term forecasts, and the Energy Policy and Conservation Act established how they do it, and essentially they have models. You've built models, I'm an econometrician, and one of the things you learn is that models don't do a very good job of picking up these changes. And these changes are changes that have come in over the last 6 to 9 months, really, that I think I've picked up on, and other people, industry's been picking up on. So I'm not saying I'm not going to criticize their forecast. They're not right. And it's because circumstances have changed. You look at their gas forecast for gasoline, and they don't have a 7% decline in gasoline consumption. They finally picked up 7% in their weekly data, but it's clear that demand's dropping. You talk to all the firms that market gasoline, they're seeing 7 to 10% gasoline drops, and if you talk to enough marketers, if everybody's seeing 7 to 10% drops, then either a lot of gasoline is just vanishing down a hole, or something's getting missed. And they have trouble with exports and imports. And we've suddenly become a huge exporter of petroleum products. And so the answer is that your calculation's right given the forecast, but the forecast's wrong.
I guess I get to say something.
Howard gets
go
to
ahead.
Howard gets to reside.
I actually, as a very young person, I was actually in the Carter administration with Fred and Phil. But I just want to say that, just to talk numbers instead of percentages, I think the U.S. petroleum consumption, which includes natural gas liquids and other things, about, I don't know, call it 18, 19 million barrels a day. Probably we're importing, and this depends on where you put refinery gain, which is a tricky business since there's refinery gain on both imported and domestic oil, but we're importing 45% of that. So we're importing like 8 million barrels a day, at least, of crude and products. If Phil is put this way, I guarantee that our reference case projections are wrong. But if Phil is somehow suggesting that between now and 2017, we're going to close the gap of 8 million barrels a day, you know, I'll take that bet, and I'll use the money to fund better data on gasoline exports. So with that, you know, I don't want to filibuster. It's not my meeting here, and I'm going to leave, not because I'm offended by anything Phil said, because I have some more work to do on Iran. But anyway, I mean, you know, so again, I completely agree with a lot of what Phil. You know, Phil and I are both pretty obnoxious people, so that's, Phil may be more obnoxious than me, which puts him in a unique class.
I'll take that.
But Howard,
you know, enough said.
Howard, no, but wait, before you run, if you give it back to, I'm going to ask you one more question.
No,
No, Howard.
I know he is.
Howard, you're not so obnoxious, depending how you answer his question. No, but if you buy Phil's basic story, but you don't think it could happen by 2017, fair enough. Is there a time period over which you think his story, including, let's take the modest version of it, the U.S. goes to a trade neutral position in energy? You know, what would be the time horizon over which you think that might conceivably happen?
If you're counting BTUs, you know, then I think you could do. I mean, we're a net exporter of coal already. A lot of people, including us, think we're going to be net exporters of natural gas. On the other hand, coal and natural gas are a lot cheaper than oil. So if you're talking dollars, you know, the issue is really liquid fuels, and you know, we could see the sort of net import dependence on liquid fuels falling, and it could fall a lot more than we project in our reference case projections for, frankly, a lot of the reasons that Phil mentions. And we have pretty substantial increases in domestic production, and our reference case has substantial increases in fuel economy, although it doesn't include, for example, the 2017 to 2025 standards, you know, which would push demand down even more. But again, you're talking a lot to get that liquids down to zero.
Now, to be fair, what I said is middle America. I'm
answering Fred's question. I'm not answering your question.
No, but just to be fair, I said middle America would be, I didn't say middle America will be essentially energy independent in 2017.
You got to watch the small print here. Okay.
But no, I did say middle America, and this I call Saudi America. Call it Saudi America.
Saudi America.
But Phil,
but the East Coast, I said 2023, maybe.
Saudi America or the East?
The nation by 2023,
nation.
I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the nation.
Again, I still might try to fund my program
I know.
on that bet.
Okay.
But I'm not allowed to do that anyway.
Yeah.
And I do find your stuff, despite whatever differences we have, I do find your things really interesting and very useful.
I
think you're a wonderful human being.
No,
that's what my wife says to her 7th grade students.
And I criticize EIA only because I'm trying to get people to give them more money to actually measure goods consumption.
Agreement. Consensus.
Thank you, Howard.
Thank you, Howard.
Bob Samuelson.
Bob Samuelson from the Washington Post. 2 questions, and partly answered by this dialogue. In your talk, you seem to sort of go from natural gas to oil and back to natural gas without any explanation, and I'm just wondering whether you can make a distinction here. I mean, I think we're roughly self-sufficient already in natural gas, given the sort of the boom in shale gas. But the oil situation, as he suggested, although our dependence is falling, it's still rather substantial. That's the first question. The second question is, I think at some point recently you talked about $300 world oil. And so my question is, are you still sticking with that? And if so, what is the analysis that leads us to $300 oil, and when does it occur?
Thanks. One, on the demand for oil. As I think I tried to say, one of the things that's going to happen is gasoline use is going to decline at an accelerated pace unless the ethanol mandate is changed. Just because what's going to have to happen is the requirement to use ethanol is there. Autos are becoming more efficient, so one will have to, when one buys a gallon of gasoline, essentially, if it doesn't have any ethanol, one will be paying $2 for the petroleum and $2 or $3 for the credit to use ethanol. And you can come up, given the levels that are mandated by Bush, and those levels were set so that we get 20% of gasoline being ethanol in 2020. That was a 12 million, less than 20%. That was 12 million barrel a day gasoline consumption, and with the improved fuel economy, gasoline will be down to 8 or something like that, or 7. And as Howard said, they haven't yet factored in the effects of the improved fuel economy after 2017. So petroleum, ethanol will still be 2 million barrels a day, ethanol, and the remainder will be gasoline. And the price of, the way we'll equilibrate it is to raise the price of ethanol credits that EPA sells, and it'll just essentially, it's going to force gasoline out. The question really is, does natural gas push diesel significantly out of the transportation business? And there are a number of firms moving ahead because natural gas is so much less. If that happens, now what you've done is you've trimmed both much more rapidly than projected in models the use of petroleum. So that's how I get down there. The $300 forecast, it's. I just gave a paper yesterday at the National Association of Business Economists with Jeff. When you run the simulations, a little model that I put together here when we were running with Iran, when Iraq invaded Kuwait, that worked very well then, says that, gee, if you lose 1 million barrels a day of crude through the Straits of Hormuz, IEA doesn't supply it properly, you move to $160 right away. And you also have these, as I said, environmental regulations pushed up the price of crude in 2008. They're doing it the same now because the Japanese are running sweet crude, the high price spread, in order to replace all the power generated by nuclear. They're down to 1 nuclear power plant. So, if you create enough of demand for the very low sulfur crude, you can push yourself back up to something like that. And it's a blunder. Again, it's just an energy policy mistake. IEA gave us one last year when they didn't release strategic stocks right on March 1st, following all the collapse in Libya, and that moved us up to this new level. By the time they finally released it, they didn't release enough, and they left us with $120 oil.
Okay, Tom.
Tom Duesterberg, the Aspen Institute. You seem to suggest that China is not going to develop its shale gas resources, and the geological stuff I've seen suggests that they have a fair amount. Could you elaborate on that?
I didn't say that they wouldn't develop them. They're just not going to be able to develop them, I don't believe, at the low costs that we've achieved. They are relying much more heavily on Sinopec and the major companies, and these companies seem to have much higher cost structures and lack the flexibility, at least everything I've observed over the years, to bring natural gas production in at these low prices. I may be wrong. I think they will develop it. I think they're going to just have a hard time replicating our cost structures. And so they'll have gas, and they'll have gas not at $12 or $15, but at $10 or $8. And eventually they may get it down, but it's going to, they're not going to be able to replicate our experience quickly. And the other thing is their incremental gas will still be coming from other high-cost sources. So whereas at the margin, all our gas is inexpensive, they're going to still have a lot of high-cost gas. They also have price controls on their natural gas, which, depending on how they subsidize it, it's going to slow this development. So that's my solution, my speculation there. And it's speculation.
Antoine?
Antoine van Akma, Ashmore EMM. I agree with you that the focus should be much more on whether we're going to be energy independent or when, but more on the U.S. competitiveness issue. And there I want to come back to this arbitrage issue, because I think that's really the key. And I've been thinking about this, and I've been talking to Gazprom and Ukraine and Poland and all these places, and they have a hell of a lot of shale gas too. And the Russians just kind of want to deny that they have a lot, and because they want to keep the price of gas high. But at some point, you can't keep denying things. And wouldn't there be another scenario than the one that you suggest, where at some point they cave? In fact, at some point, it's not going to be oil that's the benchmark, but gas that's the benchmark, and oil will be the derivative of that, because there's so damn much gas. And then that will start changing the arbitrage picture. I just want your thought.
As I said, I've only begun to scratch the surface of this thing. And I mean, that is a very, I think you're right. And the question really is, why hasn't it happened sooner? You look at France, which has a good deal of shale gas, and they've just banned, they won't go there. And Poland went in there, and then Exxon says it's too high. Well, of course Exxon said it's too high. I think you're right. I think the Ukraine is where it's going to happen, because they have the shale gas and because of their relationships with Russia over natural gas. But it's just a question of how long does it take, and how do the things progress. And I think we have several years. I think you're absolutely. I mean, this is, as I say, I'm scratching. This change is so rapid that it's really hard. It's hard to keep track of.
If I might just add one quick thing. At Brookings, we had the French ambassador just 2 weeks ago or something like that, and I asked him the question. I said, you talk about innovation, but this shale gas thing doesn't make any sense to me. And he basically said, let's look at this after the elections. I mean, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but to me, it was. If I were betting, I would say it's going to change.
They're going to be more flexible after the elections.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but again, it takes time to make this. It's going to be catching up. No, I mean, time then to develop once they start. Yeah.
Okay, there was some other hands. Yes.
Thanks. Ben Castleman with the Wall Street Journal. I just wanted to turn to natural gas for a second, and both a supply and a demand side. You're talking here about quite a lot of incremental natural gas demand, whether we're talking manufacturing, transportation, conceivably export. On the supply side, I certainly see where the supply could conceivably come from, but if you listen to a lot of the independents, listen to Aubrey McClendon right now, he's saying, I've got $100 oil, I've got $2 gas. I'm not going to divert my rigs to drill for gas just because we get gas to $4. We're going to have to get it to be competitive with oil before I start diverting rigs back. And so isn't there a fair amount of room to rise in the gas price before we spur the kind of drilling to stop that rise?
Good question. Since I totally missed this one, I hesitate to say no. But there are several things that seem to be moving this forward. One is that a lot of this gas is coming from liquids. And so, and you look just in the last few days, there have been several announcements of plants to strip. Some gas comes out of the oil, and you strip it out, and so there's a good deal of supply there. Second, some of these drillers are obligated to drill fields. And third, I've seen Chesapeake's said the same thing before when prices fell, and they slowed down for a while. But if you look at their 10K, they have an awful lot of gas hedged and sold forward, and I think they have it sold forward at higher prices. So maybe they'll wait for $100 to catch up to $100 oil, but and there are other companies. I think that you'll see a little bit of a slowdown, but I'd be surprised. Looking at the production numbers and the rate of growth, I think it'll just slow. It's not going to reverse.
Well, Phil, for those of us who are not familiar with the equivalents in this business, what would be kind of the equivalent gas price to $100 oil that would tend to equalize the economic incentives?
Well, oil, the quick thing is you multiply by 6. So natural gas, it's not the Wall Street Journal. I haven't seen the Wall Street Journal price, but Bloomberg has spot natural gas at about $2 a thousand cubic feet. That's $12 a barrel. And so, you're talking, if you Brent's at $120, you're talking $20 a thousand cubic. It's a tenfold increase in the price of natural gas to match up with and one of the things, there is this focus in the energy side always on the spot price. Yet we know, the financial industry has taught this industry so much and made a fortune from them because many of the engineers don't understand the financial. When that forward price gets up to, even if Aubrey McClellan is not drilling, forward price gets up to about $6 or7 a thousand cubic feet. There are other firms that can go say, hey, we can make money, and we will sell forward, and maybe it's not his rigs, but other rigs will get involved. So it is, one of the, one of the reasons gas prices are so low, and is that when I write about oil, sometimes I talk about the entrenched monopolists, the Exxons and Total that have run the world market for years. They left. And in teaching in business school, I always say in a monopoly is that once you build a monopoly and defend it to your death, a monopoly is a terrible thing to lose. The natural gas industry is so competitive in the United States, and futures markets make markets even more competitive, so that it's, even if if Chesapeake chooses not to, there'll be other people that'll step in and they'll do it. And so I think the forces of competition will keep prices down.
Let me ask an institutional question. I think it's partly an answer to that inquiry. How much overlap is there between oil producers and gas producers? How much of the gas output or the gas reserves are controlled by companies that have an oil gas option and can shift from one to the other? If they can shift from one to the other, then the question obviously is very pertinent. But if, as you say, some of them are purely gas producers, have no oil option, particularly if they already have contractual obligations, they may keep pumping or drilling. But so how much overlap is there between the oil and gas sectors?
Well, 3 parts to the thing. One, you say, with the right price, the company that's got oil and will drill for both oil and gas. It can make money. I mean, Aubrey McClellan is saying he can't make money drilling for gas, so he's moving to oil. And he's got a limited number of rigs. Over time, that constraint goes away, so you could drill for both. Used to be you didn't know what you're drilling for. Today, I think everybody knows exactly what they're drilling for, thanks to all the technological. Success rates are incredibly high. The other part of it is there's a lot of oil that has gas associated. And I haven't frankly done the detailed, drilled down to that level to answer the question, but we're seeing substantial increases in associated gas with, they're flaring gas now substantially in North Dakota because they get the gas with the oil, they flare it. One of the questions is, for greenhouse reasons, when are we going to require that it all be put into somehow piped or liquefied or somehow brought flaring is not. It's not something they're doing down in Texas. They pipe it in, they connect into the pipes and so on. So it's, actually to the extent where the flaring could become a problem. But
it really is Saudi America then, if they're flaring gas.
It is Saudi America.
It's like flying over the oil fields in Tehran.
Yeah.
Any other? Yeah, Howard.
Phil, 10 years is not a very long time. So just again, some more on the risk factors. What about the capital costs that are needed to make the make the conversion so that the equipment can start using this natural gas? And also, how would you rate the safety aspects of gas versus drilling for gas, for oil?
Howard, I'm an economist, so I'm not going to.
Yeah, but you can have one accident and that could put the whole thing off for 5 years.
Yeah, that's exactly right. You could. What I have learned is that the logical place to use natural gas right away is in buses. We're doing a lot of that. Many of the metropolitan transit systems. Anybody who has a fleet of vans is trying to convert quickly to natural gas. Chevy now, Honda had the one natural gas powered vehicle. Chevy and others are now coming out with natural gas vans. They're converting a lot of the vans, although the EPA has issued tougher standards. And in discussions you have with the people who market petroleum, we're entirely, almost 100% of the gas, and not quite 100, but almost all the petroleum is marketed by companies that are not owned by the oil companies. And I talk to these people, give speeches to these people 2 or 3 times a year. I talked about this difference between oil and natural gas prices last year, and I said we ought to have switches and see substitution. And several marketers came up and said, look, there's a 2-year lag in building out the infrastructure, getting the people, because what you have to do is have a terminal where you have all your vans coming, and if you order now, you're 2 years, 3 years away. It's a similar situation to getting tank cars. You know, I never thought we'd see crude moving by tank cars again, but now there's a 3-year wait to get tank cars to move crude oil from North Dakota and other places. It is, you know, there are some long logistical things. So I think what you'll see is a lot of local vans and so on. And you're right. I mean, the question is, compressed natural gas is no more big risk than gasoline. The greatest risk of all is really a train with ethanol tipping over near a school, because most fire departments aren't capable of fighting ethanol fires. Natural gas is not a big deal unless it's liquefied. Liquefied natural gas is a different story. And I just don't know on the safety thing.
Vito?
Yeah, if I could go, Vito Tanzi, former IMF. If I could go back to the question of fracking that Fred asked. Now, you said that better technology will solve the problem in the US. Of course, this is an assumption. We don't know how quickly that will happen. But when you have the same type of production in Ukraine, in Argentina, in Mozambique, in China, wouldn't we transforming a problem with energy to a problem with water? Because water is becoming a major problem in the world.
That's an excellent. Would water become an problem in the world? It's you're right. Now I have seen research at the University of Minnesota that essentially they found a set of compounds that clears the water completely. These people they have the patents. They're trying to pursue the thing. And it's not that expensive. So, it gets the major metals out of the water, and so that you've retrieved it and you've gotten the water back. And I think the critical problem we're going to face is getting prices for water right. Right now, water is the one commodity we just never price properly. If we price it properly, that won't be a problem. If we don't price it properly, that could very well be a problem.
Okay, anybody else? Yes.
Hi, Eric Lee, Citigroup. I work with Ed Morse's team, actually, so we're very much in agreement with some of what you talk about, and if the politics go right. I mean, we have 3 other sort of components that we talk about a lot as well: oil sands and prospects for U.S. deep water, and then on the demand side, even the role of demographic change in falling U.S. consumption. Wondered whether these were incorporated in your views and how you feel about that. Thanks.
Let's see. Oil sands, deep water.
Demographics on the demand side.
Not sure about demographics. I think that as I said, the auto industry. One of the reasons we're here is the auto industry had a deathbed conversion, and so that will depress consumption, and the demographics probably will depress it even more. I mean, you look at the people in the kind of 15 to 25 year range, they're much less interested in driving. They're much more plugged into technology. And somebody at lunch was saying that we underrate the way the United States moves to adapt new technologies as fast or faster than anybody else. So I think all of that's will bring consumption down. The other side of the thing, other side of the demographics is, at the Energy Policy Project, one of the things we said was, we don't need to have this rapid growth in energy anymore. We proposed this outrageous forecast, Dave Freeman did, that we could get to 2000 consume less than 100 quadrillion BTUs in the United States. And it was attacked by, the Ford Foundation got a very black eye from the Energy Policy Project. And it was attacked by all the oil industry and everything. We have to have 120 quads, unless economic growth is going to be much lower. Well, in fact, when we got to 2000, our growth was about 0.5% per year faster than had been projected by the Energy Policy Project, and we consumed 99 quadrillion BTUs. So much for the received view in 1971. It is, and it happened in part because of technology. As Bill would point out, the energy GDP ratio went down, in part because we pushed conservation. Coming back to the demographics, this generation is much more attuned to cutting consumption. The young generation, much more attuned to efficiency, houses that are efficient and so on. So I think that there's some real gains that we're going to get in terms of natural gas not being consumed and other things happening. And we haven't really taken account of that. We looked at kind of how you did buildings and so on, and you read that study and you say, gee, we're 5 times past that. Architecture thinks about the green standards and so on for buildings, moved way ahead. One of the reasons I think we'll be more successful in the United States is we have so much sun out in the West, and solar electric power works there. It doesn't work in Calgary because the sun's at the wrong angle. So, I mean, there's just a lot for electric generation and so on. Oil sands, I think that I suspect that ultimately with all this other development and so on, with Mozambique and so on, ultimately the price of oil is going to come down. I've always been a low price forecaster. I've got a $60 forecast out there right now for the end of the year. That's going to slow this development, but it'd be good for the world economy. Be terrible for Calgary, terrible for the Alberta, but I think that the oil sands development ultimately will trip on this, and it'll trip on price. Some of this will be fixed if they do it right and they've sold it forward long term. It kind of fixed prices, they'll keep operating, but it's a risk. But you take that, I think it's threatened 10 years from now.
So you're really positing a lower anyway, energy price future for the world. You've got the gas, what you're implying is the low continuing gas price in the US drags down, along with a bunch of other things, drags down the oil price, and we have a much lower energy price environment for the world economy than I would hazard a guess most people are now positing.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, you look, the Chinese, when I wrote this, somebody called me up and sent me some material. Don't know how right it is, but the Chinese are really pushing hard to use natural gas rather than oil for vehicles. You look at the Ukraine, you look at all these other areas where you're going to find natural gas and so on. And you look at conservation and kind of the changed tenor towards energy conservation. It's hard to see. I've been on the low price school for a long time on oil. It's hard to see how you stay at high prices unless Saudi Arabia once got down to 2 million barrels a day. They could go down again, but there are too many people needing the high prices of oil, and eventually that's just it'll break.
And he had a third and final question.
Yeah, I missed. I got tar sands, deep water. It's. I think we've solved that. One of the issues nobody brought up was whether we will become a crude oil exporter and that's always been a problem because one, we have no way to receive VLCCs at U.S. facilities. It all goes to Loop, Louisiana offshore, and we're not going to build a deep water port for crude. But should the United States, you can see the political developments that will occur if we decide we're going to export crude oil. Right now, it's prohibited. But if a president were to propose exporting crude oil, then the question would be, why are we drilling in the Gulf of Mexico? Why are we taking these risks? And it would become politically very sensitive. So So I think we will keep drilling, and what we'll do is export products, or we'll find ways to move them to the East Coast and the West Coast. But that it's the one area where people talk about exports is, I just don't see us exporting crude because of the and I think that I haven't talked with any of the people in the majors recently, but I asked it once, and the first thing was said would never happen, but they said, well, suppose it does, and they said, you're not going to see XYZ, and you can pick your name from the big oil companies, pushing exporting crude oil. It's just not. It's a risky issue from the political point of view.
Phil, we're past our witching hour. I want to thank you, as always, for sharing with us your encyclopedic knowledge on all this. We appreciate also your willingness to go out on a limb and draw some far-reaching conclusions that could have very profound effects. It's great to see you again. We look forward to your further development of this thesis. We hope you're right, and we'll look forward to continuing the discussion.
And Fred, let me thank you for letting me come full circle, because as I said, it started right next door 40 years ago, and it really is, the ideas have flipped and everything else. Thank you very much.
Great to see you. Thanks a lot.